Minute 5. Say, I was thinking about our emails. Evaluation had it been this year. It's like we're always a year. It was. Yeah. No. Business side, lose some of that character, and then sometimes for you have to sort of one person on your side. So. Right. Well, I mean, it's, you can't find this.
No, it's not.
Stuff. People want to be here, so, but they, but that's it. It's not just- It's big. Yeah. That's really awesome. Yeah, this is amazing. Look at the overtime. Right. I, you know, now maybe able to see how many are online. Okay, because I'm just curious, so maybe people just aren't.
Hi, Carolyn, how are you? Good.
So they're gonna order that today. So- Yeah.
So we'll have a part of that laptop there. That you're scanning it, like, so, set up to enable this, back and forth,
Mike is standing by.
Yeah, it's,
I would recommend it. But if they feel they can't.
know when you want to get started, Christine.
You guys can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, Mike. Kristen, are you all set over there?
Yes.
I think we should get started.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Sorry that we had a small gathering. Welcome anyway. We have people online. So this is a hybrid scenario, much like we had done for the last meeting. And I'm Dan Spring, if you don't know me, Chair of the Board of Finance for the town of North Stonington, the great town of North Stonington. And we're here to talk about the proposed 2021-22 budget. Probably one of the more important meetings of the year for the town. So I'm sorry that we're late tonight, but needless to say, we have a beautiful, beautiful day out there today. And it's just gratifying to see daffodils and see people on the baseball mound. Good. Thank you. All right, if I could have your attention. Yeah, are you all set, Sean? Thank you. So we're talking about the budget, and I always start by giving you the definition of the budget. And it is a financial blueprint that provides overall direction to serving the expectations of taxpayers. Are we live again now? Are we okay? All right. As I was saying, meeting the expectations of the taxpayers and the efficient day-to-day operations of the town. Also, achievement of goals as defined by the plan of conservation and development within the constraints of our available resources. You know, Mike Ergo, our first selectman, can't be with us tonight. He has COVID, positive for COVID. So he is on Zoom, but not here physically. So he's going to talk about some of the achievements, but you know, just in a snapshot, in our plan of conservation and development, our top priorities have been public safety, education, and economic development. Before I go on, I'd like to thank my Board of Finance members, and they include Carolyn Howell, who's here tonight. Thank you, Carolyn. Paul Simon, our Vice Chair, Ann Aiken, our Secretary, Dan Smith, Mike Anderson, myself, our two alternates, Brett Mastriani and Sarah Nelson. We've put in a lot of hours starting back in January to bring us to this point that we are at now. Next slide that you're going to see presented is the actual budget process. And I always like to show this slide, even though it's not easy to read, perhaps from the distance that you're at to the screen. But this whole process really starts in the early part of the calendar year with a submission of budget proposals from boards, commissions, and committees to the Board of Selectmen. About the same time, for the Board of Finance members, we're hearing from our assessor, Daryl Del Grosso, who gives us a view of the grand list as we ended the previous calendar year. And the grand list is a very important item. It's truly the engine for all that we hope to accomplish in town. Those who are not familiar, 90% of the grand list is made up of residential properties. That's where we're anchored, in residential properties. As we go through the process, we then are given the presentations from the various boards and committees. Some we do in conjunction with Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed. So we listen to that, that's the submission. So as we then go through all of the data that has been presented and the backup data, that really takes us through February and March and brings us into April. So that's kind of the look. You're going to hear from the major pieces of the budget, which is going to be Board of Ed from Christine Wagner first. Second, General Government presented by Mike Ergo, our first selectman. We always look at major considerations, and there's certainly a lot that has impacted decisions made by the Board of Finance. But certainly looking at the present day economy, and I would have to say that that is improving. Here we've come out of the depths of the pandemic, which started late January, early February, only to be called the pandemic in April, where it led to over 14% unemployment nationally. Right now, we're about 6% unemployment. So there's still a lot to be gained, but I can tell you, very close to the financial news, the economic news, March and April have been surges in terms of employment nationally. Our own, the town of North Stonington, our fiscal preparedness. I'm happy to report, and this is bared out by our annual audits, that North Stonington is in very good shape. I think the strongest fiscal position that we have been in many, many years, in fact, perhaps in our history. Debt management. Debt is always one of those things that, God, we probably program ourselves not to be in debt, but there's actually a responsibility on the part of a municipality to carry debt that is actually demonstrated by investments we've made in our community. And certainly the ones that are most prominent was our new emergency management center and our 2 new schools. So that would be 4 on this slide, our capital projects and investments. We're coming back to talking about the grand list. The grand list is something that's based on valuations of properties in our town. There's a mandatory valuation every 10 years. So in 2020, we had a valuation where our last one happened to be in 2010, mandatory. And it was interesting what happened in 2010. We were just coming off the Great Depression of 2008, 2009, where real estate prices literally plummeted. For the town of North Stonington, again, heavily weighted in residential properties, we lost $100 million off our grant list. So that was significant, and we had to bear that as we move forward. We had an interim reval 5 years after that, and still lost ground. So here we are now in 2020, and you can see from this chart kind of how we progressed. Where the peaks were back in the 2006, 2007 area, then to fall. Then for 10 years, we literally straight lined. And now in 2020, with the reval being completed, it was reported that our grand list had increased by a little over 8%. So still not making up that 100 million, but significant. And we compare that to other towns in the state that were on the same cycle in terms of revals. And most other towns are reporting only a 1 to 3% increase in the grant list. So our 8%, was something I had forecasted, hoped would happen, and I have to believe that a lot of it was generated from the investments that we've made in our town, particularly in public safety and in education. The next chart, as people ask me this question, what does the mill rate look like historically? And how do I understand it relative to revaluations? So again, a lot of numbers up here. Probably the notable, if you look in the column where it's showing the term revaluation year, that would be important. So just to give you the extreme case, back in 1989, we had a grand list of only 113 million and had a mill rate of 40. In 1990, our grand list more than doubled and brought the mill rate down, providing the same services, get apple to apple, down to 17 and 3/4. So pretty incredible, quite a swing. If we go to, let's go down to 2005. We saw another nice increase in the grand list. Just before that reval, the mill rate was 30. And because of the increase in that engine, the mill rate fell to 80.6. Excuse me, 80.6. Yeah, you got it right. So I gave it kind of a quick recap on what happened post-Great Depression with the reval in 2010. So here in 2010, we had a grand list of 625 million, which has been our high point so far. And if you recall, 2007 in particular, real estate prices were just going up and up and up. But as the reval came in, as I said, we had lost $100 million off our grand list. And we were at a point where, okay, now it's the reverse. The grand list isn't looking so robust. We had to actually increase the bill rate to offset what was lost in the revenue from the grand list. So you can see we went from a 20.29 mil up to a 23.75. And for those who were paying attention back then, we actually had gone through 4 referendums, finally setting the budget and the mill rate, simply because people were trying to understand what had happened in terms of the economy, its impact on the grand list, and what it meant in terms of revenue from the grand list to continue meeting the expectations of taxpayers. So, as I said, we had an interim reval in 2015, and again, we lost ground. We went from 530 million to 512. And again, fighting with the mill rate to where we are now. So in 2019, we had set the mill rate at 29.5. I think it's important to point out in that 10-year period, coming out of the Great Depression to where we are now, our small town of North Stonington has done a lot, to which you all should be very proud. I think it's happened through fiscal responsibility with debt management and meeting goals that we have defined for ourselves. And the pride, of course, would be our new emergency management center and our school system. So that brings us to where we are now. You can see we had a sizable increase from 2019 to 2020 through our reval. And from that, we now will move forward to ultimately determine what the mill rate will be. So Let's get a quick snapshot of what's happened so far. As we talked about that process, the budget process, and the input from Board of Education, which makes up 70% of our budget, and general government. We're going to hear from them. So at this point, I will continue after we have presentations from Chairwoman Christine Wagner from Board of Ed, then our first selectman, Mike Burko for general government. Christine, you come to the mic.
Steve, can you get, I'm sorry, could you do the pie chart first? And then I'll go back to this one.
Thanks, Dan. I also want to thank the Board of Finance. It's been a really crazy year after what we went through with the budget season last year. I think we really came up with some great solutions this year. It's been nice working with you guys. And I felt like we had some really good successes through this budget process, so I do want to thank that board as well. We've just come off of quite a roller coaster ride for the last year with COVID. So a little over a year ago that we shut our schools down in a matter of days, deployed equipment to all of our students to make sure they were able to go into online class learning. Our teachers picked up Google Classroom and ran with it to make sure that all of our students were getting the quality education they were accustomed to. And we were successful at it. And I'm really proud of our schools for being able to do that. We are now back in full time. It's really great to be back into our new facilities. Without them, we wouldn't be able to be at school. We wouldn't have the air quality that we have in our new facilities. We wouldn't have the classrooms that we have in these new facilities. So it really, the timing couldn't have been better right before a pandemic to be able to open brand new buildings. We've met, I can't tell you how many times to get this reopening plan going. It's in like its 29th revision. Starting in March of last year, we were meeting weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, 2-3 times a week to make it happen. So I really want to thank our staff and our central office, everybody for making that happen for us. We had some really good successes last year, though, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're always looking at our ongoing finances and our budget. We had an administrative contract come up last year. We were able to restructure our special ed position to an assistant elementary ed position with special ed duties, which was really great because now we're able to assist our principal who has been asking for help over at the elementary school for a very long time. We did that without adding another position. We had a brand new principal join us in December. We've been able to implement school of choice during the pandemic. So we have students from both Voluntown and Preston paying tuition to come to school in North Stonington. And we had ongoing discussions throughout the year with our bus company to renegotiate the contract, knowing that we weren't running our buses as much and doing everything we could to try to appreciate some savings everywhere we could. So here's what we know about our budget, and I know that everybody has heard this repeatedly, but it's really important to understand. We have a contract with our staff, primarily our teachers and our administrators. It's just like every other school district across the state of Connecticut. Our teachers have been really good at negotiating with us. We usually fall in where we should be under with the DIRG, if not a little bit lower. But that being said, our contractual obligations make up, I think we can see here, well over 90% of what our budget is. So that is leaving us very little money for anything other than salaries to operate the school. And that's books, that's textbooks, that's software, that's turning the lights on, that's all of that. Anything that's not a contract is falling in that tiny little piece of the pie. This year, our anticipated increase for contractual was 2.36% on top of what our budget is this year. However, we did see some savings in health insurance this year, which was really great. So that brings us down to a contractual increase need of 2.24% over our current budget. We also looked at things of how do we prioritize. We asked our administrators and our superintendent to do zero-based budget. So they started at zero with every line item. And where they came back to us was a 4.4% increase. over last year's budget. We've worked really hard with the Board of Finance to understand that that's not going to be a palatable increase for our taxpayers. And so what we had to do was figure out how do we fund it. And so if, Christine, if you want to go to the other slide now. This is, well, I know that Dan had mentioned we take 70% of the town's money. This is also all of the money that comes into the town because of education. $2.5 million of that is from educational cost sharing that comes from the state. We have 5 tuition paying students anticipated coming in. 2 more are on a different contract, but we are anticipating 7 students coming in this fall. So that's going to be 57,000 plus probably another 22 on top of that. We also have title monies. We have grant monies coming in. We were able to receive 2 grants currently for this year and for next year for COVID expenses. And they were able to cover everything for us from, the state gave us 300 Chromebooks. We were able to cover things like software, just anything that was COVID related, PPE. We bought sprayers for the schools instead of outsourcing that. Deep cleaning, we actually are able to do our own spraying. So those grant monies that all come in were able to help us offset some of our COVID expenses. But it still brings us back to how do we fund our budget. So the Board of Ed took a long look at reevaluating our expenses, taking a look at where our monies could be found to do this. And this is where you want to go to the next one more. You'll see that we took the 4.4, we made about $151,000 in cuts from the budget. We removed anything that we anticipated was removed from the budget. We didn't know it was going to absolutely be an expense that we had, we removed that. Some examples of those cuts was a tuition cuts for special education. We went only with what we knew was going to be on the books for next year. We were able to reallocate by using some of the ERISA 2 funding. We also had savings this year anticipated in transportation, so we reallocated expenses there. And we also went to the non-lapsing account. If anybody's familiar, we were just given that from the Board of Finance last year to allow us to carry over any savings we have each year into what's called a non-lapsing account. And what we can do with that is when we have capital needs or one-time needs, we're able to go to that account instead of adding it to our budget. Which keeps us from having to have a maintenance effort on that budget set each and every year. So by doing all of that, we were able to still hit our really necessary needs for our budget and for our education, but bringing our overall budget increase to 1.78%. And that's the 3 pages that were sent out. They were online, right? So if you want to go to those. The big ones, the bigger increases you'll see is always again with the salaries, and those are contractual. There's really not, I know a lot of times people want us to just not do that. We don't have an option. You have to work within your contract. You have to work with your union, and we have really, really good teachers here. Had a wonderful experience with them, and I think we've done well by our contractual obligations there. So that's kind of where we're at this point, is the 1.78% increase. Is there anything else that you need me to touch on right now? Okay, and then questions after Mike, right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Next, we're going to hear from Mike Ergo. He's going to talk about the budget for general government. Mike, I know you're on virtual with us, and we welcome you. And sorry to learn that you are experiencing COVID, and still very happy to be with us tonight. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. And can everybody hear me? You guys can?
Yes.
Can? Okay. I'll try to speak up. Thank you. And I am sorry to not be with those who are in person tonight. I'll start off by just a little PSA. I'm very thankful that I had received my first vaccination dose in early April. Unfortunately, this must have slipped in before, but I just share for myself. I'm somebody who's a little bit high risk with asthma and allergies and stuff, and I'm doing pretty well. You can hear in my voice I'm a little hoarse and certainly tired and not super great, but I'm here with you tonight, and I just would encourage everybody to consider getting that vaccine because I think it's probably helped me out a lot, and like to see everybody get it so we can get this virus out of the way. As I move through this, I just want to start by first of all thanking the volunteers and staff and boards for all their work in what was a really challenging year, as everyone knows, but really kind of going above and beyond and shifting gears and doing things differently, and just being versatile in a time where it's just been kind of unprecedented. And I'm very proud of North Stonington during this this year. We basically had this to beat. We've continued with the ability to have our meetings and do business in a different way. I want to especially thank my board. I believe Nita and Bob are both there in attendance. Nita Kincaid, Bob Carlson. Appreciate all their help in developing this budget that you have before you. So I'll go through a few things. And what I'd like to start on is some accomplishments. I think it's really important for the taxpayers to know what their money, what their funds are being used for. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll just talk about a couple of things. Actually, I can't see the screen that you have, Christine, but I'm on the first accomplishment slide. And so you'll see here talking about a couple of great things. Well, one of them is Boom Bridge Road. So the Boom Bridge is open, and I think that's a huge accomplishment, something that took a lot of work from a lot of people. Really proud to have that bridge back open again. As you can see, we have mentioning some pictures here of solar that's going on school buildings, and the last of that project's happening actually right now with the final ZREC going into place. But we've accomplished getting solar on almost all of our municipal buildings now, which is going to be a great savings and certainly an environmental advantage for us. Next slide. You can see that we completed the 3-car garage, the closeout for that, for the Center for Emergency Services, which came in under budget. We moved voting this past year, which was a necessity given the COVID situation, but really a long overdue move anyway, over to the 298 Northwestern Road Education Center. So that was a big thing for us, big change and very exciting. Dan already talked about revaluation, which was a big undertaking in a pandemic year to have been completed. We did a fairly substantial culvert replacement on Babcock Road, and we did receive an award for some paving in Meadowwood and Cedar Ridge. And I'm going to talk more about grants a little bit later in this. Next slide. Just a few more pictures here of some of the work. You've got some Boom Bridge pictures and some of the culvert work that I was just talking about. The next slide. This isn't necessarily something the town accomplished, although we did contribute and help a bit, but really this was led by volunteers. The fact that the new playground at the elementary school, and what an exciting thing for our students coming back from the situation they were in to have this brand new playground. So kudos to the PTO on that. And, certainly thanks to our town staff who did help in little ways, but mostly a volunteer driven initiative and community funded project, which was exciting. We did have a ribbon cutting at the elementary school, as Chairman Wagner talked about. Really thrilled that we were able to get our students into safe, healthy spaces in such an important year. So that was really great. We did finish a feasibility study, which was grant funded on the John Dean Gallup House located at Hewitt Farm. And we have a $4,500 grant for technical assistance, which we also obtained this year. Next slide. Just to talk a little bit about development, a lot happened in a year where you wouldn't expect it to, I guess. But Stonington continues to be number 2 on the indicator score for business development. So we're doing some really good things here. And I think, as Chairman Spring has said for years, I think when we invest in ourselves, we see that investment come from others, and we certainly are seeing that now. We've done some things over the last year. I'll just name off a few. Creating new opportunities for growth and investment with a new commercial zone, investing again in our own properties and services. We have addressed blight in some areas where we're getting rid of unsightly things that need to go to just make it a better atmosphere for everybody. Maintaining our roads, our infrastructure. We're exploring opportunities with water and sewer where it makes sense based on our planning and zoning guidance. We're working on regulations and just supporting other boards as best as we can to see this development continue to thrive in ways that the folks in North Stonington would like to see it happen. So we thank everyone who's taken their own money and invested in the town of North Stonington. We're very proud and very thankful for those investments. Next slide. So to talk about this budget that you see in front of you, I'll then mention a couple of notable budget changes. We do have a reduction in revenue, one-time revenue sources, which is affecting this budget, and I'm sure Chairman Spring will speak a bit about that. You do have a 2% increase for labor contracts, which is contractual. We did also fund this grant writer position previously, but we've just broken that out from B103 to B114. So it's just a separate grant line. And I'll talk a little bit more about the dividends we're seeing from that hire, which has been pretty substantial. We do have an increase for Wheeler Library. For those who probably weren't at their presentation, it's very obviously clear we're underfunding the library from a town's perspective. When you look at how other towns are funding their libraries, we need to bring that up to a place that is more consistent with what the library's needs are. And we all are well aware of, well, we may not all be aware of, I'm very well aware of what the library does for the community. And it's been very strongly evidenced, especially over the last year during the pandemic. We also are increasing some salary for the wetlands enforcement officer to assist with zoning. So our planning and zoning development officer has more time to focus on many of the tasks that she is buried with, as well as for us to do a better job on zoning enforcement, which only keeps our town going in the right direction. Slide. So I wanted to highlight the new capital project funding. This is not what we'd like to see, but I'm showing you because we had made a lot of concessions in our budget as it moves forward for consideration, and not just on the capital side, but the capital side really, there's not much in there this year. And these are the only two new things. Plan of conservation and development is something that we need to do on a 10-year basis. This is not going to pay for the POCD, but it will help fund the POCD to start to fund it, and hopefully we can fund the rest of it next year. The work is starting on it now this year. And the flight and mapping is also not going to fully fund flight and mapping of the town, but we need to do flight and mapping to get us the information we need in order to properly document from zoning and building perspective everything that needs to be done on the town side. So that's something that, again, this is kind of a down payment for us to begin that process. We removed a lot of items from the capital project. We started with an electric vehicle tractor trailer, which was removed, a F-250, which was removed. We talked about putting money aside for bulky waste closure. We know that eventually that's going to happen. We had some financial software that we were very strongly advocating for, some furniture for the education center, for our town meetings that are going to soon to be held there. We also had planned to do a department review, which we removed that. We removed an increase for the land acquisition fund. So this will be now our, I think, third budget where that line has been reduced. And we did have monies put aside for water sewer. I just want to mention that because, some of these things we are thinking or hoping there may be alternative funding sources available with some of the grant funding that becomes available through the federal grant programs that are coming out. And that was kind of the concession that we made here as we move forward with really not having much money in capital. But we do have a capital project work group that has been working over the last couple of years to try and put together a capital plan so it's even on a year-to-year basis. So we know we can plan for, say, 500,000 per year in capital expenditures. That's something we really need to work towards. And if it's not going to happen this year, it really needs to get on task next year for the best for the future of the town. Next slide. So I did talk a little bit about some grants that have been awarded to North Stonington, thanks to our great new grant writer, Craig Russell, who's been doing a fantastic job for the town. And as you can see here, we've been awarded about $320,000 in grants this past fiscal year. It looks like we're going to pass on the electric vehicle grant as that was eliminated from the budget, but it was a grant that was awarded. And we do have other grant applications that we're looking at this time as well. So that's besides some of the federal monies that are listed on the next slide with the Safe Polls grant, which we received for nearly $6,000. We've received about $13,000 in FEMA reimbursement. We've received $56,000 in COVID relief funding, and we're projecting to receive about $500,000 and change for the American Rescue Plan. And that number could go up or down based on some other factors that we've been hearing about, but nothing is definitive yet. Just so you know, some of the received money, while it would go into the undesignated fund, we actually will likely do appropriations later in the year for monies that had to be spent for these COVID expenses. So that money will reimburse us, which is good. Next slide. I just wanted to point out a little bit of history with regards to our budgets. On the general government side, there's been, at least over the last 5 budgets that we've been a part of, I mean my board and I, it's been very nominal increases and really not necessarily even keeping up with just the contractual obligations. In fact, we had a reduction that year of 2020. So you can see here, there's been a commitment to fiscal restraint and very frugal spending plan, as you can see here. If we go to the next slide, you can see where there were increases, which was not unexpected, and that's in debt. Chairman Spring spoke a little bit about this, but we had some big projects, and we capitalized on low interest rates and really favorable conditions for us to get really a great situation with the borrowing that we needed on both our emergency services center and our schools. So that's where you see the redemption of debt numbers going up. And we'll go to the next slide. And as you can see, I already talked about capital, and you can see this trend here, which is not really going to be a long-term plan for the town. But there's kind of an agreement that this year, working with the Board of Finance, that we hope we can get some of our capital needs funded elsewhere. We would go through an appropriation process with the town, and we'll need to bring this back into line next year without question. Next slide. So what you see here is the total budget that's being proposed by general government, and it does list also the Board of Education here. And this would agree with the paperwork that you would have. With that, I turn it back over to Chairman Spring, and I'll be available for all questions once you open it up.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your presentation. So now we're going to go to Christine. The review for 2020, 21. Bring us to the future.
Talk into the mic.
Pardon me?
Talk into the mic.
Thank you. Can you hear me? We're getting some feedback though on this, Jen. How's that sounding? Better? Okay. So, to move us to where we're closing, I wanted to do a review of the fiscal year 2020-21. So needless to say, and we've pointed to it a number of times, it was a year of COVID, of the pandemic economy, pandemic environment. And all right. I'm sorry for that interruption. See if we can smooth it out. All set, Jim? And as we completed the budget for last year, as you remember, there was not a referendum, so that Board of Finance set the mill rate. And the mill rate happened to be raised from 29 from the previous year to 29.5. Here's a review of 2021. We had total expenditures of $20,752,000. We had total revenue of $20,312,000. So we had a shortfall. This was due by COVID, and a couple of other small things. But it meant that for us to balance the budget, we chose to pull from the unassigned. So that amount of money that you see there, $440,544, was pulled out of our unassigned assets to balance the budget. Our outstanding debt currently, and in this current year, is $26,733,278. So that's the debt for our emergency management center and our two schools. It's to be noted that just those two investments alone are appraised or started with price tags of roughly $44 million. So here we're looking at only in debt 26 million on 44 million. Our percent of debt service to expenditures, that was what we're putting out in our budget to maintain that indebtedness, is at 5.8%. Actually a very low number. Our unassigned fund balance, which I talked about earlier, is at $3,021,855. That's unencumbered. The amount that's being pulled out of the unassigned to finish the budget for this year, 440, that would be an add-on to that 3 million. But we can't count that. We're going to be using that to have balance the budget. I might tell you that that's an important number, maintaining that unassigned. We do have a new policy that was revised by Board of Finance on use of the unassigned. And in that policy, we have a floor of 8.5% against expenditure to be maintained, and a high limit of 17%. Anything that goes over 17%, that money will be used to mitigate taxes or reduce indebtedness. So we're sitting at 14.56%, and we see that as a very good number. All of these numbers, have been audited. That's a mandatory every year, and that always happens at the end of the budget process. So they demonstrated the audit. It's important to have a strong unassigned because it shows that we have stability relative to our expenditures in town and our management of the town. It also makes us more attractive to the debt market. So if we want to make investments in the town, that we can go to the debt market, demonstrating how well we have managed our money. And I would tell you on the projects that represent that $26 million of indebtedness, that the entity that we have those loans with, USDA, they solicited us, and we're very happy to have us as their client. And as Mike alluded, very low rates there. The majority of them were at 2.75%. But most recent tranches of the school project, they were at 2.3. So we were kind of averaging 2.6% on that as an interest rate. In terms of the school, it is a 30-year amortization, but that through USDA, we have no penalty for early payment. And again, we're averaging 2.6% on our money. The mill rate, again, for this current year, 29.5, and again, that was levied by the Board of Finance without going to referendum because of COVID. So if we can go to 2021, the next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so this is the budget we're currently in. So the overall budget had an increase of 476,189, which represented an increase, the total budget increase of the previous year of 2.35%. A little bit higher increase in general government, a little bit higher increase in education. And for the education piece, as Christine had alluded to, we were starting the School of Choice initiative, which is paying off very nicely, where our school is actually becoming a revenue source for the town. Very, very exciting. So let's talk about the school, just so people have a picture of that. Next slide, please. This is the mill rate impact on our indebtedness relative to the school modernization program. And we currently are at a mill rate impact of 2.05. So for the mill rate, I'm demonstrating to you at 29.5, a little over 2 mil of that is because of the town's approval to move forward on the investment in our school district, like developing a new middle high school and a renovate as new elementary school. And that as we went to referendum on this, and did, as you remember, many referendums, many public presentations, we thought we would be staying between 2.5 and 3.5 mil. So here we are at a little over 2 mil. So we're very proud to be there. I know there was some concern about whether it should be a 30-year amortization or a 20-year amortization. Both of those were looked at and vetted. And for the school, we're on a 30-year amortization schedule, just to reemphasize that. So that brings us to our current year. And you heard the presentation from the Board of Ed and General Government, where this year, again, we're nowhere near out of line from what we've been doing year after year. The overall budget up just a little over 2%. Again, added debt redemption. Talked about that, showed it on the last slide. And again, maintaining our commitment to our Board of Ed, which we think has been paying off very nicely. So this is in a position where what's it look like? The proposed budget that you have is an unbalanced budget right now. And the calculations you see on revenue, we're taking our current grant list at 570 billion plus. And because of that increase, we're looking at 8%. If we were just apples to apples, what would that mean in terms of the mill rate? I showed you the mill rate migration where the grand list moved up, usually the mill rate moves down. It would put us at a 27.4 if all things were even. However, by doing the review of 2020, 2021, I showed you that we had to take money out of the unassigned to develop the balance budget for that year, for our current year. That means that that has to be settled. And to do that, it would have to come from the increase in our grant list and the mill rate yet to be decided on, but a proposed mill rate to balance our budget just received tonight, we would be at a mill rate of 29.2. So less than the 29.5, but against higher valuations. So a mill rate of 29.2. Next slide. As Mike alluded, just in trying to settle what we had done in this year, and we did that in consideration to the taxpayers. How do we move the town forward with all the expectations and obligations without hitting them hard in a year where we are experiencing a pandemic, where everyone's lives have been affected. I mean, we just have to look out. Hair is longer, masks are on. I mean, and that's just part of what's the Board of Finance. I mean, really kind of went at it hammer and tong in terms of where can we develop some savings. What I'm showing you are the actual line items that really had been deliberated in a very lengthy manner and debated back and forth that are not in this proposed budget, but still perhaps could be considered under consideration by putting it back in the budget. So public hearing, as you know, is giving the townspeople, the taxpayers, an opportunity for input, see what their thoughts might be relative to the proposed budget. But I wanted to highlight some of the things that were very strongly debated. So the first one is the first selectman salary, a reduction of the 64,000, just under 65,000 to 56,000. By doing the restructure of government, we put a little more emphasis on land use in Juliet Hodges' position, and by bringing in Christine Diaz, our financial administrator. And is this an area that could be reduced in terms of time of the first selectman, the responsibilities of the first selectman? In this category, I would have to take hats off to Mike Virgo. He's really pushed forward on a lot of initiatives that are not covered by Julia Hodge or Christine Diaz. It takes a lot of hours, a lot of meetings. We've had a couple of first selectmen in the audience. You know what it takes, and it takes a lot of hours and carries a lot of responsibility and liability. And our legislature is the taxpayers of the town. And I think they always want to be able to go to the elected chief administrator of the town, our first selectman. The second is the North Stonington Education Center, better known as the old middle high school. That is a building where, as we completed our school modernization program, we had an overrun in remediation of biohazards that kept us from being able to do a demolition of the middle school wing, which had been proposed to be around $1 million. The remediation of biohazard on school modernization, particularly to the elementary school, renovated as new, was an overrun of over $700,000. I'm happy to report that school is considered a health wellness facility and is state of the art in terms of air quality in particular. The second item was the addition of a second full-time per diem individual at the North Stonington Volunteer Fire Company. The current budget that we are in now, we did provide for one full-time staff, and they had a request for a second. The thought there is that bringing in volunteers has been more difficult, and there's a responsibility to have people on site to be point of contact to respond to any emergency that might happen in town. And the next is, Mike alluded to, was a replacement truck, and actually an F-250 for our public works. The 20,000 would represent roughly the lease payment over a 3-year period for a new vehicle. They felt strongly that they had one that really should come off the road, and this would be a replacement. And then the last is 60,000 for general government financial software. Currently, in general government, we're using QuickBooks. For those who might be familiar, in terms of Board of Education, they are on the financial software program that has been mandated. The general government should be on, whereby the town is seamless in terms of its financial accounting and reporting. But we left it out of the budget. So that was another strongly debated. In fact, the Board of Finance had unanimously suggested bringing this, or brought it to appropriations, where it was narrowly turned down by that town meeting. So there we have it. Things that we've had to make compromise on, things that we had to repatriate because of considerations of COVID and the pandemic economy that we have been in, that we know has affected many. The only thing I can tell you is that we move forward, things are looking bright. I alluded that unemployment is looking better. Interest rates have stayed low. Our capital markets are at all-time highs. And who would have thought that as we looked at it in March and April this time last year. So we've come out of a pretty dark space, but moving forward in a very positive note. And again, we've made tremendous stride over the last 10 years. And it's our responsibility, our charter, to move the town forward in a very prudent and financially responsible manner. So with that, we now will take time to take questions from the floor here at the gymnatorium, as well as those who have joined us virtually. If you want to speak, we have a mic that's set up back there, so everyone can see who you are. If you'll just identify yourself. Jim has got to give you a sense of positioning.
What truck are they replacing on a lease? Which one is it?
Mike Greco, I think, is still on. He can tell you explicitly, but it would be a light truck relative to the one recommended.
Yes. That's correct. I'm hearing some voices in the background, so I can't exactly tell if someone was done speaking or if someone else was speaking, but it's I believe it's a F-250. So it is a light duty truck, but it would be used for plowing as well.
Just ignore that.
You go ahead and speak.
The volunteer fireman request cut. I don't agree with that. I think we kind of said we were going to do that in 2 phases. We've skipped it now. I would ask that be restored. For the 3rd year in a row, I've asked for a detail of the debt schedule, the short and long, so we'll be able to see where it's going in regard to increase, decrease, et cetera, and so forth. And we always used to do that. I've asked for it 3 years now. Okay? And it's a good way of taking a look at someone being able to measure, can we afford to continue to borrow or at what level we can borrow. It's a good picture if you do. But I would still love to see the debt schedule of the past of how we paid down or what we paid in to the school project. You know?
I think that's something easily provided, and it's usually an informational piece that is attached to the budget. And Christine Diaz, you have something to add there? So, yes, we can add that as, so you can see the schedule. In terms of our indebtedness, and we showed you the numbers, but by state statute, our town has a ceiling just in education of indebtedness up to $61 million. So it's a factor times our collectible taxes. So by state statute, we can go as high as 60 million just in education. And of course, I'm not suggesting that to be the case, but that is part of our annual audit. This is probably one of the most critical documents we have in town. And I also would add, if I could mention it emphatically, our auditing service has told us year after year after year what a good job they're doing and how efficient they have been in spending, executing the budget, and building fiscal strength of the town.
I've heard it before. Do you intend upon increasing the undesignated fund balance more than what it is now?
Again, as I said earlier, the Board of Finance did take time to do a revision on the unassigned fund balance policy. And we have a ceiling of 17% against our expenditures. So it's not our intent to move to that ceiling, but that's what's provided by policy.
We gotta do something better about the sound system.
You're not hearing me well, Nick?
No,
I don't know how we correct that, Jim. Try to bring the mic closer. Oh,
Feedback next time. So listen to that.
got it. Nick, thanks for your input. We're going to consider that as we meet Wednesday evening, our next Board of Finance meeting. You feel strongly about the second volunteer fire
yes,
staff person.
public safety, why things are going good, we take it for granted. All you gotta do is see one blunder that could have been avoided, that all of a sudden it's shame on you.
Right, as I said earlier, by plan of conservation and development, public safety has been a top priority for that question. So thank you for that.
Good, then you're gonna approve my request.
I bring it to the Board of Finance, but I wrote it down right there. Got it. Yep. We look forward to input from Nick and or any others who would like to. We have another speaker. You identify yourself, please.
Jim Baldridge.
Jim.
I'd like to know why we can't move some of the fixed card charges into the categories that they pertain to, like the emergency services. We have, and I'm not saying these are unreasonable numbers, but they're giving an unrealistic picture. We're looking more to increase funding for these departments. We should see the total cost for the department before we make the decisions. For instance, the longevity award, the stipends and so forth, and insurance for the fire department, ambulance corps, every other department. If they're put into the line item for that category, we will see the total dollars spent for that line item. The way it is now, we see one number on one page, and then you have to go look for the other number to put them together. And I don't think that's right or fair. We should know what the total cost for each department is on one line item and not spread across the budget.
Christine, maybe you can help us with the accounting. One thing I would say, Jim, and our auditing services always tells us we're better off eliminating line items, bring the line items down, so.
Well, I'm trying to do that, get rid of that over this side, put them into the real budget.
No, that's what I heard, yeah.
So
That's not a change that,
I'm just gonna speak loudly. That's not a change that we've made to the budget. It's been like that consistently from year to year. So we can talk to the auditor and see, but just like other types of insurance live under fixed charges, that's where they're supposed to be. They're not operating expenses for the fire company or the other areas.
Well, it really is an operating expense because it's a cost for them to be there. And so, I just think it's, for people to have to go pick through budget, pick things out, different categories without getting the final tally for each department with highway or whatever it is, that we should have it. And we're talking about spending a lot more money in the fire department, emergency services, with more people, bringing people and so forth. We just need to see what these real costs are in one place. Because it gives the impression that we're trying to disguise how much we're spending by moving it around in the budget.
We can talk to the auditor about that. We're certainly not trying to disguise it. It's how it's been always done, but it sounds like a great suggestion, and we'll speak with the auditor about it.
Next thing, are we going to have a meeting when we get this next lot of money from the federal government for the federal relief for the COVID and so forth? Or is this just going to be doled out by a small group of people to wherever they think it should go?
So in order to spend money, and I think most people that are here are probably familiar with this, we can't on general government side spend money that's not been budgeted somewhere. There has to be a process by which those monies would be spent. So there will be a discussion. I think it's, from my vantage point, there's some clear areas that we know we have funding shortfalls that we will talk about when the guidance for how those monies can be used becomes available. We have some basic guidance, but it hasn't been carved in stone yet. But you could definitely look forward to future meetings about how those monies would be spent, and there'll be certainly a public process to that.
One of the things that I looked at the sheet up here, we had the 5 or 6 items that we're hopeful to use the federal money on, and one was the software, which is just defeated, is brought back, even though the townspeople said they didn't want it.
I don't see personally, I don't see the software as something for those monies. I would love to hear feedback tonight from people that they feel the software should be put back into the budget. I feel pretty strongly that it's an important expenditure, but we're all trying to make compromises, and we're all trying to do our best for the town. We're all taxpayers. So I hear what you're saying, but there will be discussion about, where those monies would be used. And there's certainly some unbudgeted expenses that we will need the money for, that are upcoming. So, we'll have those discussions in the coming month or so, I'm sure.
I think one real important place for that money to go is back to the tax base with reduced taxes. We have bear the brunt of financing. You guys have done a great job getting through COVID, but it's come at a cost, and we've had to pay the bill. It's time for us to get a little relief too. So we should be taking whatever is mandatorily used on COVID-related expenses and put it back into the general fund and reduce our taxes by that allotment to give the people who are paying the bills, because we're certainly going to see higher bills on the federal level as well. We should be getting a break on this as well.
The reality is that the tax burden to the people has actually been quite minimized over the last few years, which I demonstrated in my presentation. I know it always, maybe it doesn't feel that way, but that's the reality of it. On the government side, there has been very minor increases, and but I hear what you're saying. I know I don't want to get off track. This is about the budget, but I can tell you that there are some expenses upcoming that that we would rather not have to put on the backs of the taxpayers or the general fund. And we will look to execute the use of those funds as fiscally responsible as possible with collaboration with the Board of Finance and certainly public input.
Well, if you're not going to give us back a rebate, or not rebate, but reduce our taxes by whatever amount is left over, then you are putting it on our backs, and we are still paying the bill.
Well, we'll agree to disagree. We'll talk more about that in the coming meetings. I don't want to take up the meeting with this discussion about it, but I hear your comments and we will have more discussion about it.
Brian, if you'd like to come to the mic, you can, and just identify yourself.
Can you hear me all right? All right, well, I'm Brian Rathbun, I'm a senior citizen with fixed income trust fund. And I'm the guy that Reval brings a 51.7% increase to my wife based on the present bill rate. I'm the guy who gave up coffee, gave up a six-pack, and drives an 18-year-old truck. I received a stimulus from the federal government, struggled watching friends lose jobs, hours cut, and businesses struggle. I'm the guy that attended many Board of Finance, Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, Zoom meetings, and made suggestions. I'm the guy that believes it is the Board of Finance that makes sure the town lives within its means of the town's budget. I'm the guy that's seen taxes increase since 1958 when my mom and dad moved here with other boys. I'm the guy that's told we are all together. I watched the Board of Selectmen budget reduced, but only in certain areas. I'd say you should revisit the Dean House, the Hewitt Committee, all advisory committees. I'm the guy that suggested the Board of Finance revisit line items dealing with Recreation Commission, item B1601, what programs versus the participation program. B1602 through 1605 will possibly add savings. Line items 23.01 through B23.16 deals with donations that we give out to different places. Yet I see nothing in there for the North Stonington Grange, the 4-H, or the Scouts of our town. I'm the guy that supports the Board of Finance suggestion for zero increase in the Board of Selectmen's budget, especially in this year, the COVID year that's not over. I haven't forgotten the Board of Education. I'm the guy that was amazed that 95% of the Board of Education budget is contractual obligation. I understand that the town people vote only on the overall cost of the budget of the Board of Education. I suggest that since the taxpayers pay the bill, then they should be able to review the pays and the benefits before it's signed and before it's carved in stone. We should be notified when negotiations going on. Can't forget that the education unions are one of the unions that put Connecticut in debt. I hate to see it put North Stonington in debt. I'm the guy that requested for many years, statistic, 5 years after graduation. What are these people doing that graduate from our school? Are we getting the money? Are we getting the money for the results of what we're paying for the education? We spent 23 million on a new school. I hear $57,165 come back for new students coming in. That's good. How many of our students are going out of our school to other schools? And do we pay for tuition and busing going out of our district? It's the policy for the kids that come into the school. Policy that the teachers get that come to our school. Still come tuition free. And how much is that costing us? I think that policy should be updated if it's still in. The guy that was at the Board of Finance meeting, when the Board of Education asked for guidance, it was given. I believe that 0% should have been the guidance. I'm sure that sports would have been said that they have to go. Or maybe lay off staff. Sometimes unions and people price themselves out of a job. I've seen it done before. I'm not saying you have to lay off teachers, staff, or anything else. It may come to that option because 95% is an awful lot of a budget. I'm the guy that is requesting and challenging the Board of Finance that this is not the year to move the town forward, but to only maintain living with the monies that it has for revenue. It's been subtly suggested a fee, which would be a tax, to the transfer station. We've already had a tax put on our town just at the last meeting for the building permit. It's just an added tax. Which will make it with developers to say, I don't have any benefit really, except pay more for the building. Taxpayer and the homeowner should be the ones on your mind as you prepare the budget. I'd ask that you go back, revise a livable budget, and do like I and my wife had to do. Look at our budget and see where we can go without and what we had to do just to be able to stay living in this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. They did make notes. Christine Wagner is going to respond somewhat.
Thanks, Brian. Just to address a couple of things, as far as teachers getting free tuition for their students, that policy has been revisited and changed. We're no longer allowing that for new teachers coming in. The other thing is on tuition. Our tuition to out of district has gone down 54.5% for last year's expenses for Ledyard Bowie. And one of the policies we also changed was transportation to magnet school. We no longer provide transportation for that. So we have addressed those items and we'll continue to do so.
Dan, if I could respond, it's Mike.
Please go ahead, Mike.
Just a general comment. I think the comment was, enough of the budgets that are moving the town forward or something to that effect. And I can assure you, this is a conciliatory budget. This is not a budget that, the Board of Selectmen put forward a budget that we attempted to have things in there that we felt were necessary in relation to our strategic plan and plan of conservation development. And most of that has been stripped. So this is a budget that is, as Dan alluded to, the fact that the Board of Finance has elected to repatriate the monies that they took from the undesignated fund in one lump amount in this budget, which basically put us in a position where we needed to make drastic cuts to kind of offset for that hole that does need to be refilled. There were discussions in the Board of Finance to do that over a 2-year cycle. That's not what the Board of Finance ended on at this time. But I would say that this is a very lean budget and not a forward-looking budget.
Thank you, Mike. I think we have participation from people on Zoom.
Just a reminder to our online attendees, if you would like to comment, please raise your virtual hand and you will be recognized. At this time, Peter Nero, you are recognized. If you can unmute.
Thank you. I'm not going to talk about the Board of Ed budget because Christine did a great job, and we really respect that the Board of Ed has including such great input from the administrators in this budget. But I'm really here to talk about Infinite Visions, and I'm just making one final plea, and I know that it was struck down a couple of weeks ago, but you folks have the ability to go into Infinite Visions software program. We did it last year. It's a phenomenal program. As you know, Sandra Wellwood, for 2 years in a row, has talked about the outstanding finances of the town and the Board of Ed. And last year, when she found out, when she spoke in person about Infinite Visions, she talked about what a great program it was and that the town should take a look at it as well. So I'm just saying, for terms of streamlining, as we have tried to work with all the boards, as the Board of Finance, Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, and especially in terms of financing, you're a large organization and you're still using QuickBooks. I'm just making a plea, if there's any way possible, I think it would be a smart thing for the town to purchase Infinite Visions, especially at the price you're getting at, which is a real good price. And even we dealt with, we took out a company that deals with municipalities. We took out a 3-year loan on it, and I think that it would be a smart idea to split it up but purchase that program. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input. I'd like to echo what Peter just said and advocate for the inclusion of the financial software in this year's budget. There's areas of the government, I don't know if we're doing it on little back envelopes or something. How do we do our HR and stuff like that? We have no coordinated method of keeping track of things. And, I think it's ridiculous for a town in 2021 to not have a coordinated financial software system that keeps track of everything efficiently and gives us a lot greater reporting capabilities. Everyone wants to see how great open government is. I think we need to see something where we can provide the reporting. It'd be a heck of a lot easier to produce these budgets if we have that software. I think it's very inexpensive for what we're getting because the school board already put in a significant amount of money getting the original license. Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Let me just say one thing. For anybody who's on the phone right now, reminder just to hit *9 to raise your hand.
It seems like we've started talking about adding things back into the budget, per diem firefighter and software in town. I don't think we should be, I think we need to talk more about what is this going to cost us, the taxpayer. I mean, we saw a 2% increase in expenses, and you mentioned an equivalent mill rate would be 27.4, and you're proposing 29.2. Can you tell me what percent on average that will increase from the 27.4 to the 29.2? Can you tell me what percent tax increase that would be?
Roughly 60.
On the mill rate, it would be roughly a 6% increase.
So on average, the taxpayers will have a 6.6% increase in their taxes. Granted, the different things happen to different properties with the reval. The average taxpayer, you're asking for a 6.6% increase in taxes. I'm one of the people that live in Kingswood. Look at the grand list changes. Kingswood, Meadowwood, Cedar Ridge, the neighborhoods, any household, most houses under 300,000. Us conservative folks are getting hit the hardest. My taxes will go up 13.1% with this proposed budget. I think to be talking about adding to the burden that what you're already asking for, a 6.6% average, is way too much. I think we should be asking for a 2% tax increase on average. More of a less than a 28 mil versus 29.2. You're overtaxing folks in a year that they can, a lot of people, half the town can't afford to do so because of the reval. And I think we need to come in with a lower budget. And the things were pulled out of the budget to lower it by the Board of Finance, and I think we should keep them out of the budget and go back before the town meeting and reduce the budget further. Thank you.
John, thanks for your input. Just relative to the current year that we are in, that accommodation was made to keep the mill rate down. We had really no strong forecast or definition as to how the reval would develop, other than investments in our town would increase the value of residential properties. So even though it's more taxes, there are people who probably have realized $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000 increases in the value of their home, which is probably their one biggest asset that they have in their portfolio. So if you have that type of increase on your 401k, you would be jumping for joy. So unfortunately, it's a pendulum that swings, as I tried to demonstrate in the mill rate migration chart, that we have had the benefit of undoing the damage that happened in 2010. And the townspeople have to realize that since 2010, with a grand list that dropped $100 million, mill rate increases have been modest, and that's been demonstrated by the historic numbers that I showed you. And yet, look what we have done in town to bring value to our community. So all of it's a bit of a trade-off, and I appreciate what you're saying in terms of percentages. But mill rate also has a little over 2 mil on the school modernization program. So that's something that was agreed on by the community at large. So without the school modernization program, we'd be talking about 27.2 or less mill rate. But we've made that investment, and as demonstrated by the presentation by the chair of Board of Ed, the school is actually becoming a revenue center, which is unheard of. And yet that's what's happening, because of the quality of education there, the quality of the facilities, and it's bringing more people to town. And that's demonstrated by the number of new properties that are being built in town. So I like to use the analogy, the bell goes ding and dong. Hopefully it's moving in a positive way for our community overall.
You just mentioned that the school project is costing us an additional $2 million this year. And do you want to clarify, because I see that the increase.
Sean, excuse me, if I can respond to that. You know that that's not the truth of it.
That's what I heard, Dan.
What I said, well, it's been cumulative, it's accreted.
I understand that, but
Okay, well, thank you, thank you. It means if I could pull out the school modernization program completely, I'd be pulling out 2 mil, because that's what the school project is ultimately representing.
the increase for the school project this year is more like a 0.2 mil, is that correct?
0.3.
0.3.
Yeah.
6.6% increase. I just can't believe the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance sees that as being feasible for our town. Versus what was the CPI increase? 1.4 and a 0.3 for the increase in school payments. That's what our increase should be. CPI plus the additional burden from the school project.
Sean, I appreciate your input, being first selectman and also being on the Board of Finance and other boards in town. I think you understand that there is a cost of moving the town forward, not moving the town back. And we talk in terms of percentages, but here we have a public hearing. Why don't you tell me what your solution would be other than cutting things out of the budget? What's your grand scheme in terms of, and I only ask you these questions.
Budget?
I'm sorry?
Is to cut more out of the budget. We're not gonna make more revenue. So yes, in order to get a realistic budget, we need to cut more things out of the budget. And I could outline, I have a list of what can be done, but I know you don't care to hear that.
Hey, Dan.
I already posed the question to you, Sean. I didn't hear, I wouldn't pose the question.
Dan,
Thank you.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, it just occurs to me based on what you're talking about that, back in 2018, I think our mill rate was 28, and, now we're at a 29.5. We haven't even the agreed upon mill rate that people were thinking the impact from the school building project was going to be, somewhere around 3. And that was put in the presentations that we talked about. You presented tonight that it's going to be at about 2. We haven't, so over the last 4 budget cycles, or 5, as I showed in my presentation, we haven't even realized that full effect of the school building project, yet we've funded our budgets. It's pretty remarkable what the town has been able to do, even with this additional debt that we've had to take on. So I just wanted to make that point. I know you made it in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
We're gonna take somebody from Zoom at this point, just to kind of keep it balanced, going back and forth.
Tom Marsh, you are recognized.
Yes, I just kind of want to reiterate what Sean was saying. You really need to take a harder look at what can be cut. Many houses in this area are in that sweet spot that he's talking about, that 250, 325K sale price. I myself am looking at a 17% tax increase, and that is just beyond unacceptable at this point. The Board of Finance was charged months ago, and the Board of Selectmen were charged months ago to present a 0 budget. The Board of Education was charged months ago to present a 0 budget. It's not happening, and it has to happen. I've said my piece. Thank you.
You heard your Tom, thank you.
I hear about reducing budgets and so forth. I go back to what I said before. The money coming from the federal government, all we're doing is looking for more places to spend it. We're not looking for giving relief to people who have been through the pandemic the same way you have. And not everyone is whole. You're ignoring that. you're thinking like it's everybody's status quo and everybody can afford an increase. It's just not a reality. We need to find ways to bring the budget back down, and that's one way without cutting anything out of education. Is just give the money back to the people that we get from the federal government because we've already paid the bill for our COVID relief.
That may not be while that idea will be explored, that may not be an appropriate use of the funds. So it's premature to talk about too much of the use of the funds. Thank you.
We have no other participation at this point. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Carolyn?
Carolyn Howell, I'm just speaking as a taxpayer right now. I've listened to all of the demonstrations and I don't know how we're gonna make this work this year, but anyways, I can see the value in the infinite vision software. I see the value in sharing information at the same time, making it accessible to multiple people at the same time, making it accessible to all the boards and public. I think it would be a great tool, and I'm sure that Christine would love it because she wouldn't have to answer all the questions from me and other taxpayers looking for this information. I think that there's a way to demonstrate the return on investment and the savings and man hours that are spent in providing and researching and doing, you know, all the things that we have to do. So I think it would be helpful if Christine could demonstrate maybe how many man hours she actually spent doing all of these things and where those savings could be realized. And obviously, open government isn't working the way we're supposed to, which is unfortunate, but this is where we're at. So, I mean, maybe not for this year, but I would like to see that software at some point in the future. But I think that there are ways that we could save on, you know, one aspect and then pay for it in other areas. I'm also seeing an increase in my taxes. I believe it's around 25%. So, you know, it's under $1,000, but it's almost $1,000. And I think that's a lot for one household to absorb. And I would just like to remind everyone that's in charge of making these decisions, whether you're on a board or you're just a taxpayer voting, that all of us do pay the same for our gas, our groceries, and utilities. So no matter what our income level is, so you know, just keep that in mind when you're thinking about how other people might live and struggle and how they're trying to meet their needs in that home. I also don't want to price up our volunteers who are living in town. A lot of our volunteer firefighters live in Kingswood and Meadowwood, where we're seeing those increases, and you know, other board members as well. So I just like to remind people about that when they're looking at the big picture. The grant writer, I think we should be funding more because he's definitely got a great return on investment, and I think that we should be writing for grants wherever we can get them to offset the cost of the town. So I agree with a lot of what different people have said. I agree with Jim Holdridge. I know your face. I just when you said, you know, that the line items, it would be nice to have them so that people could easily see where the money is budgeted and where it's being spent. So I would appreciate that as well. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Any other comments at this time? Yeah, Zoom. Mike, do you have anything to say in closing?
No, I just reiterate my thanks to both you and Christine and the whole team there for anybody who came out tonight, and appreciate this valuable feedback that I know the Board of Finance will take to heart. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. With that, we're going to adjourn this. Oh, Nick, I thought you were headed for the door. So, please.
I'm not leaving.
Go ahead.
the money we're getting from the government on the pandemic, as I understand, it's about $500,000. When are we gonna know what that's gonna be spent on? And why isn't it available tonight?
Yeah,
Nick, can you hear me, Nick?
Mike is gonna answer that.
Can you hear me, Nick? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I know he said the audio wasn't great. So the federal government has. The
Come over here. Nick, come forward. Nick, come forward.
Yeah, if you come next to the speaker, you can hear me better. I'll try to speak up. The
Forward.
The acoustics are terrible.
I
What
know.
happened to the
I'm sorry. We're
Go
doing
ahead.
the best we can. The federal government has told us what the guidance says as far as what those funds can be used for. However, Treasury hasn't codified that guidance yet. So although we have ideas, we don't really know. What we did, or what the Board of Finance did, was they said, well, we think there's some things that possibly the funds could be used for, that would be considered. So in order to mitigate the impact to the taxpayer, things were taken out of the general government budget, the capital budget. We also know that we have other expenses, and in 298 Norwich Westerly Road being one of them, with utility expenses, maintenance expenses, that were unanticipated. We thought we'd have a rental in there, but because we kept it vacant for a while, not knowing the school's needs and a variety of factors, that could be used for those funds. We've talked about the volunteer, the per diem fireman or woman. These are things we've talked about, but there will be greater discussion, but it's too early for us to budget for those funds. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure those funds are used appropriately and in a way to not spend more, but to mitigate the impact specifically caused by COVID in a lot of ways, but also other things that we can do to mitigate the impact to the taxpayer. I think we've demonstrated a very fiscal restraint over, at least since I've been here, and we'll continue to do that.
Did you get most of that, Nick?
Yeah, I heard it. I didn't get an answer.
Yeah, it's because he doesn't have an answer himself.
That's all I can tell you.
We don't know.
Do you have any inside information whatsoever that gives us somewhat of a,
No, I in particular have asked Mike probably on 3 or 4 different occasions.
We
Haven't
know
gotten any.
we know what they're saying, but until Treasury codifies it, it doesn't matter. It's not. We can't preemptively make decisions until they codify everything, and so we're waiting for that. And we know the time frame it's going to happen. It's 90 days after President Biden signed the bill. 60 days, then the state will get the money. But it should be that within that 60 days that the Treasury comes out with their guidance, and then 30 days from that, the towns should be able to get their money. But we don't know what the exact uses are yet. Stay tuned.
what was the general cost for general government and the Board of Education to adhere to the social distancing and all the rest of the requirements? Do we have a number on that?
We have a lot of numbers. We've gotten money back on a lot of that stuff. I think the school would have to speak to their funding, but we have those things. I don't think we have them tonight, Nick, but we do know that we have received some grant funding, which I talked about in my presentation, for some of those costs.
I can address, at least from the SR2 account, the second grant we were given, it was an amount of $83,068 for this year and also $83,000 for next year. We had spent full of the $83,000 for this year for everything COVID related. It's very specific on how it has to be spent. It all has been COVID related. And if you look at when I initially talked about the 4.4% need that we have for next year, we have looked at reallocating as many of those expenses as we could move into a COVID situation for those ESSER funds as allocation. And one of the handouts that you were given shows exactly what those reallocations were. Anything from technology to math online subscriptions for interventions to HVAC things that we can do, anything that we thought we could get through the application for grant money, we pulled from our budget request into those ESSER funds for the $83,000.
Now, can we take and reimburse ourselves from the money for what we did spend?
Yes.
Well, that's what we did with, yes, and we've done that, like with the filters, we put in higher end filters, we were able to go back
Thank you
in
for
and get
the note.
savings. Yeah.
We've done the same on general government side. We've received, I said it in the presentation, but about $74,000, and those have gone to pay for COVID related expenses that were unanticipated.
And that was, just to reiterate too, that was for this, the second grant. And if we didn't get the first grant, was another about 87,000, also all spent on COVID related expenses.
So can't that money be a reimbursement and then possibly a mill rate reduction?
We have to use ours. We've used our money.
I know you did.
But so where would it
Yeah,
reimburse?
we used it, correct, okay? But when the money gets allocated for what you spent, are they gonna be reimbursed?
Sorry, I'm not following the question.
But they lived within their
Yeah.
budget.
What he's asking, Gee, if we've had expenditures that have come out of your budget, but then we're reimbursed, are you really actually lowering your budget? That's kind of the essence of what
Yeah.
he's saying.
Yes. Yes, because otherwise we would be asking for a 4.4% increase. We're actually asking for a 1.78.
Yeah, in terms of her budget, if you look at the revenue side of her budget, Nick, you can see where that grant money came in. So it is offsetting their expenditures. In other words, lowering their total budget. By having those assets come in. Right, at this time, it's 7:50. Any other comments, contributions? We have one from Zoom.
Marsh, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I know you want to cut it off, but I think a lot of people want to hear the answer to this question. Will there be some revisions before the public vote? A lot of suggestions were made tonight. A lot of comments were made tonight. I sincerely hope people are getting the message that, you know, this tax increase is not being well received. And I would like to know if a new budget will be presented or if you plan to just leave this one as it is and see if it sticks for a vote.
Yeah, the answer to that, Tom, is this is a public hearing where we requested or solicited any input from taxpayers that will be considered at our subsequent Board of Finance meetings prior to the next town meeting. I can't speak in a singular fashion because items that have been talked about have to come forward to the board and the board will deliberate. But they will be answered. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I have this on record correct. The ESSER 2 funds that we reallocated from the budget from the 4.4% really would have only brought us down to about 3.8% request for overall budget increase, but then we also did additional reallocations that weren't grant related to get us down to 1.78. So I just didn't want everybody to think that just the grant funds took us from the 4.4 down to 1.78. Is that understood? Right, thank you.
Thank you. We are finished with our Zoom contributors. And if there's no other comments on the floor, I would see that we adjourn this public meeting. Time being 7:53. Thank you very much for being here tonight.